For more than 100 years, Ford trucks have shared the hard-working values and independent spirit of cowboys everywhere.
This is the story of a global cowboy culture that began 15 centuries ago in a tiny corner of the Mediterranean and spread from there to every corner of the New World. It's made up of thousands and maybe even millions of people. They come from different backgrounds and speak different languages, but they are united by common traditions, by a love of the land, and by horses.
Rich, how we doing?
Just waiting on you, boss.
All right, let's go.
Okay.
10-642, come in, Sean.
642, go ahead.
Okay, we're going to head out southwest and make a drive over to Rattler. If you need us in the next 20 minutes, we'll be able to pick up. Otherwise, we'll be on horseback.
Okay, that sounds great. 642 clear.
Lucy, where are you cattle laying out in the southwest?
There was a lot running between that camel mill and the rider's tub. The rest of them were out on that pitchfork plant.
Okay, I'll take an extra man with me down there and get off the creek. 10-15, come in, Rich.
15. Go ahead, Mike.
Rich, you watched the weather last night?
Warming up this evening, Mike, but it's supposed to be pretty nice this morning. But we can get them together before it gets too hot.
Lucy, don't be the mule's tail today. We gotta hurry up and get things done by lunch.
10-4, that's where I go most of the time.
On a big modern ranch like the 4-6s, the cowboys trailer their horses to the start of a cattle drive. After that, they'll spend the rest of the day in the saddle.
All right, cowboys. Monty, you and Jake head north. Boots, you take these three guys, go up through the middle. The rest of you guys come with me.
We'll ride with these cowboys and with riders from many different cultures to discover an ancient way of life that's very much alive today. A 1,500-year global tradition that has helped shape the entire New World. The 4-6 stretches out to the horizon, nearly 500 square miles. The spring rains bring fresh grass to the prairie and a new season of work for the men.
It's something we all look forward to. We get to go out, make the big drives, handle a lot of cattle. It's the same as it was 150 years ago. We get to go home and sleep in bed every night, as opposed to sleeping at the chuck wagon like my granddad did. But the basic work is the same.
The old ways of riding and working are still used today because they still work best. And because of that, to discover the roots of this ancient culture, you don't have to look in the past, but you do have to look in some unexpected places. Our history begins in Morocco, on the western edge of the Sahara Desert, at a present-day traditional Berber wedding. The ceremony takes place in the village Kasbah, its ancient fortress, where the bride is prepared by the women of her new family. The men from the wedding party wait outside the village. 1,500 years ago, their ancestors perfected a new style of cavalry warfare using their Moroccan barb horse. They had no way of knowing it then, but this athletic endurance horse would be the predecessor for cowboy horses throughout the Americas. And this lightweight saddle of rawhide stretched over a wooden frame, this bit with long levered arms to better control the horse, and these wide flat stirrups would be the model that nearly all cowboy tack would be based on. But it's still used in its original form here, as the men stage a ceremonial attack on the Kasbah to honor this warrior heritage. In the early 700s, Moroccan horsemen conquered Spain. There in the province of Extremadura, cattle owners saw great opportunity in the Moroccan way of riding. They adopted their horses, saddles, stirrups, and tack, and used them to manage much larger herds of cattle over much larger areas. The vaquero, the original Spanish cowboy, was born. True to that military riding style, vaqueros used then, and still do today, long blunt lances called garrochas to steer their cattle around. The most important conquistadors also came from Extremadura. When they set off for the New World, they took with them their barb horses, their cattle, and their cowboy ways. In 1520, the conquistadors landed in Mexico, right here in Veracruz. Their horses and cattle were a perfect match for this new green paradise. Mexicans adopted and refined the vaquero way of life, which became the defining culture of our country. Rafael Sanchez and his father Samuel are riding to a charro association near Jalapa. These men and women are charros and charras, ordinary people committed to preserving our 500-year vaquero history through this stylized horse culture called charrería. Mexican vaqueros invented almost every piece of gear that's used today by American cowboys. And many of the English names for cowboy gear come from the Spanish. Espuelas became spurs. Chaparreras became chaps. Mexican vaqueros evolved the saddle as well, adding the horn, a place to tie off their most important invention, la reata, the lariat. These charros are getting ready for a charreada, the grandfather of rodeo. Like rodeo, its events evolved from what cowboys do on a ranch. In this event, Manganas a pie, Rafael will try to rope a running horse from the ground, as if he had been thrown and had to catch a horse to ride. Back on the 4/6s, the cattle drive continues. From 1600 to 1800, thousands of cattle escaped from Mexican ranches and multiplied by the millions in the land that would become Texas. In the mid-1800s, Texas immigrants using Mexican methods began to round up these wild cattle and move them north to provide food and leather for the Industrial Revolution in drives that looked a lot like this one. In this way, Texas cowboys spread the traditions of the Mexican vaquero throughout the American West. But this drive is coming to a close. Since the cattle here roam freely over many miles, the cowboys need to brand them in case they are lost or stolen and vaccinate them against diseases. But first, they need to separate the animals, letting the cows pass through the gate while holding back the calves.
Sometimes it'll get so rushed that one of the calves will squirt out. And usually what happens is we'll have an older man behind the gate who will be ready with the rope so that whenever he comes out, he can just rope that little calf.
We're always mindful that the animals don't get overstressed, so we don't want to have too much of a traffic jam at the gate. Once we have 8 or 10 calves up there, we'll swing the gate open and then let them go out into the bigger pen with the rest of the calves. That way they're not upset.
Most cowboys in the ranches look forward to the branding.
You've been busy all winter with just general ranch work and people scattered out, staying in camp. When you start branding, it's the first time you've had these cattle together. It gives you an opportunity to see your cattle and see how everything looks.
You know, it's kind of nice to see the fruits of your labor out there. You know, you've worked real hard to get every one of them calves ready. You want to kind of compare them with everybody else's. You know, everybody's got their own cows that they take care of. That's kind of bragging rights, I guess you could say.
Branding and vaccinating is hard but necessary work. To make it faster and easier on the calves and on themselves, the 4-6 cowboys work together as a team, as cowboys do everywhere. These gauchos are taking a break from mate, tea made from the leaves of a holly tree. In the 16th century, vaquero culture went from Spain to Argentina, where it would evolve differently than in Mexico. The cowboy's military past traveled with him, and on many estancias, the horses are trained to line up like soldiers. These men work in the Iberá marshes, one of the largest wetlands in the world. Their saddle is more like their Spanish ancestors, using sheep's wool for padding, but it also uses leather from the capybara, a huge swamp rodent that won't crack in the wet climate. It's so wet here that boots would rot on their feet, so they don't wear any. The grass here is not very nutritious, and the pastures are separated by swamps and rivers. To keep their working horses in good grazing, the gauchos have to move them around a lot. In the early 1700s, gauchos began to move, finally establishing Spanish horse culture in Chile and Patagonia at the far southern tip of South America by the late 1800s. Not much has changed here since then. These vaqueanos move their horses down from the mountains before winter sets in.
caballos acá son muy fuertes.
The horses here are very strong because they've adapted well to the mountains, to the rocks, and to the plains. It's a very strong horse. They can ride for 14 or 15 hours per day without any problems.
Scientists have tested these horses and found that their DNA is almost identical to the Moroccan Barb, confirming the link to their North African past.
Los caballos tusa larga son los potros.
The horses with the long manes are the colts that are ready to be broken. We'll separate them and begin their training in the winter, but not much. We'll work them 2 or 3 times, then more in the summer when they're stronger.
Más en el verano.
Around the world, training and caring for horses is a cowboy's favorite part of the job.
The way we break them here keeps them from bucking usually. If you were just to try to do it the way the old cowboys used to, they'd just throw the saddle up there, cinch them up, get on them and ride them.
For many years, it's just kind of a fight, man against beast. These horses now are gentler, and there's an art to it.
We'll rope him by a hind leg, and he'll kick at it and really fight it for a little bit. But once he figures out that if he'll just stand there, that rope won't come tight, then it's easier to get up next to him and put a halter on him. Once you have the halter on, comes the saddling part. And we'll kind of do what cowboys call it, sack him out. We'll get that saddle pad and we'll just pitch it up on his back and kind of just play with him a little bit, and that'll help him to stand there. Or sometimes they'll get away from you, you just got to pull the saddle back off of them and start all over again.
Once a ranch horse is old enough, the cowboys train it to cut, to be able to separate a single cow from the herd.
When you're working a cutting horse, you're going to have to guide him a little bit in the beginning. But really, we've had generations of horses on this ranch, and we've bred them to have good cow sense. So once you've shown them the basic moves to make, they're going to start doing it on their own. It's in their nature.
In every stage of their lives, ranch horses get a lot of attention. Each year, the 4/6 mares give birth to around 200 foals.
I love working with the young horses. They're really the biggest challenge because, you know, when they're born and they're on their mama's side and you haven't handled them much, they don't really know what to make of people. We get a lot of abscesses around here. Obviously, the country's full of mesquite, so we get a lot of mesquite thorns in their hooves. And if the mare's gentle, we can go out there in the pasture and catch her. And the ranch foals are real good about following their mamas because they have to stay with them, you know, all the time. Usually if they have a thorn in them, they'll be pretty darn lame, non-weight bearing a lot of times. We usually put a poultice on it to draw out any kind of infection or anything else that might have formed around that thorn. And we'll leave it on there for 2 days and change it until all the drainage has stopped. As long as you're scratching on them and talking to them nice, then they don't mind too much. Just like any other domestic animal, they kind of end up liking it.
.28, go ahead.
Say, Boots, we got a bull out here in East Ash, east of Bat Mill. Won't you grab Reg and Monty and come on down here and help me load him?
10-4.
Handling a bull is the ultimate test of a ranch horse's training. It must be strong, agile, smart, and brave.
These bulls out here are going to weigh around 2,200 pounds, and a horse about half that. The bulls are really stout, and it's very dangerous work. Generally, we use a little hook to reach in the trailer and pull the rope off over the bull's head. If you stick your arm there, you might not get it back.
Watch still. Watch still. Hey, Ray. You and Boots run him on down to West Horse. I'll see y'all at the house.
Boots and Jake take their colt for his first ride in the pasture. It's all part of building a strong bond between horse and rider.
I love to ride a horse. Recently, I was sitting at the dinner table in there and I said, I've got a lotto ticket for $90 million on that deal tonight. And the guy said, what would you do if you won that thing? And I said, well, I don't really know. My wife said I'd go to the barn and saddle up the next morning. I look forward to just getting up and riding a horse. And I've been doing it since about 47 or 48 every day.
The Foster family brings in their pack horses for a trip into the mountains. Cowboys and cattle moved north from Texas through the American West and eventually into Western Canada around 1900. The Fosters founded this outfit in 1960, and now 3 generations work it. Running a ranch in this remote wilderness is a lot of work. The Fosters fell their own lumber to build their own houses, homeschool the kids, grow a lot of their own food, and use hydro generators to make their own power.
Jake, everybody ready?
But like many ranchers, when it comes time to work their cattle, they get a lot of help from their dogs.
The dogs are really like our hired hands. We can't do a job without them. I'd rather have 2 or 3 dogs herding cattle by myself than 2 or 3 riders that aren't experienced.
In the summer, the Fosters keep their herds in the high country. They're careful not to overgraze any pasture, so they must move the cattle up out of this basin and into another. They couldn't do it without their canine cowboys.
If you watch them work, you can see them moving from side to side or around the herd. I can send the dogs out and have them bring cattle towards me. The dogs can get there in half the time. When they stay quiet and work quiet, it keeps the cattle settled and just makes the whole experience more productive.
Come by. Head up. Stay. Bring on.
The commands are from a dog's perspective, and that's a difficult thing when you're working the dog, to be putting yourself in their place. So when I give the command, away to me, that means the dog should move to his right. Come by is to the dog's left. Back, they should step away, and generally they don't. But sometimes when they're working and in the heat of a job, it's hard for them to hear the commands.
Walt, Jake, and Josh leave the cattle in fresh grass and ride back for high camp.
Howdy.
Hello there.
How was it, you guys? How'd it go?
Pretty good. Good day.
Hey, boys. Tom.
Canada marks the northern end of the trail for New World cowboys. But to wrap up the history of this global culture, we return to Mexico, to the charreada. These charros preserve Mexico's 500-year vaquero heritage. Events like coleando or tailing recall how a vaquero would bring down a calf for branding before the days of the lariat. The Paso de Muerte, or Pass of Death, simulates the old way of breaking a horse before there were fences. A charro rides up next to the unbroken colt, and when the time is right, he jumps and rides till the horse stops bucking. The escaramuza, the charras choreographed team riding, celebrates the ancient partnership of rider and horse, upon which the entire culture is based. In a way, these riders bring our international journey full circle. Moroccan warriors began the tradition with their barb horse and new way of riding. Spaniards applied the Moorish horsemanship to herding cattle, and the vaquero was born. Mexican vaqueros perfected the Spanish techniques and taught them to Texas cowboys, who took them north through the western U.S. and Canada. While the Argentines did the same thing in South America, from the swamps to the pampas to the icy mountains of Patagonia. Through the charreada, these young Mexican women celebrate and preserve this 1,500-year-old tradition. And when they have children of their own, they will pass it on to them. The day is winding down on the 4-6s as well, and Jake, Dawn, and Alicia bring in the horses for tomorrow's work. This is the story of a global cowboy culture that was born in a tiny corner of the Mediterranean and spread from there to every corner of the New World. It is a way of life, lived in the freedom of the outdoors, timed to the seasons, tied to the sun and the rain. And wherever the land is wild and the grass stretches to the horizon, it will endure for centuries to come.